All right, welcome to That Doesn't Suck. Today I'm doing a different recipe. I've got to make some hamburger buns because we're all out and we don't like to buy them, so I'm going to make them. Now this is a recipe I've used several times, and I've used it to make hamburger buns. I've also used it to make just dinner rolls from the same recipe. All it really is, the difference is how you shape it, because I use more of the dough to make a bigger for a roll, for a hamburger bun, and then smaller for rolls. So what I do, so what this recipe is, it's from a place called Grains in Small Places, was where I found the recipe, and it's kind of interesting, so we'll go with it. And this is not a sourdough recipe. So what I'm using is I've got 450 grams of hard white wheat that I've already ground, and it takes a half a cup of milk. I always like to use whole milk, and it's just, I think, better properties. And then it takes a half cup of water and half a cup of sucanat. Now you can use brown sugar. This is basically honey granules that are darkened. And then I use 2 eggs. It uses a teaspoon of lemon juice, and then a half a teaspoon or 2.5 teaspoons of yeast, and then half a cup or 4 tablespoons of butter softened, and we'll show you how that goes. So we're going to do things in a couple of different ways. So we'll get this all start mixing up and get going with it. Okay, the first thing we're going to do is, after we've milled all our grains, got everything set aside, in a small saucepan, I'm heating half a cup of milk. This is what we're going to use the milk for. And what I'm going to do is heat that up. And when it starts to get a little warm, we do this on low heat because you don't want the milk to boil. And then I'm going to add 1/3 cup of the flour from the, it's just part of the entire thing. And we're going to just heat this in the saucepan until it makes a thick paste. And then we're going to remove it from the heat. And this is supposed to create a more moist flour, because a lot of times I've had problems with getting the texture right in a fresh milled flour dough, because sometimes the texture just seems a little coarse. It doesn't seem to get as soft as bread flour. But, you know, there's more stuff in here, so this is, I don't even think, arguably more healthy to use fresh milled flour. But it does require to do things differently. And, you know, it's not that the texture of this bread is wrong, it's just that we're not used to it, because we're used to, you know, growing up with Wonder Bread and all that kind of crap, that if you've seen things on the internet now, you kind of wonder if they're even using flour in some of this stuff. But these have been some of the softest, nicest rolls I've ever tried, so I've been thinking about whether or not I should use the same recipe and just skip this part and maybe add the milk and the water into the final recipe and just see how it would come out, and if it's that much of a difference. Because there's also a difference in how I treat the dough after I get it together, which I will show you. All right, and as soon as this comes to our paste, all right, you can see that's kind of what I'm looking for. It's got nice thick consistency, kind of like a thick oatmeal. So once I've got that done, take it off the heat, let it sit aside. And while I'm doing that, I'll stick the butter in, because it says for a softened butter, but I find it works great if you just stick it in the pan. And while this is cooling, because you don't want to throw this in your dough hot, while this is cooling, you let that butter melt in the pan with this, and that kind of loosens it up too, so you can, because you got the effect, you just want that grain to absorb the milk and make that paste, and then that works into the dough. Okay, I've got that cooled now, so we're going to start with putting our ingredients in. Our eggs in the mixing bowl, the sucanat, or honey or brown sugar, whichever you like to use. And I have a teaspoon of lemon juice. And yes, you could use real lemon juice. Well, that's real lemon juice, but you could use actual, squeeze a lemon if you want, but I don't see the reason to do all that. It's not that big a flavor. It's just nice sometimes to keep some of that on hand. And I have a job where I keep cutting my hands, and I hate squeezing lemons because, man, it hurts. All right, so we got all that in the bowl. So we're gonna mix this up. So I'm gonna go over the mixer, and then after we get this mixed together, we're gonna add our flour, and we're gonna mix that together and let it autolyze and let it sit for 15 minutes. So we're just gonna bring it together, let that sit for 15 minutes, and then we're gonna add our yeast. All right, so we've got everything in the mixer now, so we're just gonna bring this together. I'm using the paddle attachment just to mix all the liquid ingredients. All right, that's mixed enough. So now we're going to add our flour. And I'm just going to dump all this in. I'm just using the paddle attachment. I'm not going to switch to the dough hook yet. Obviously, start that off slow. Okay, that's all we need. So we're going to let that sit for 15 minutes, and then we're going to add our yeast and start the kneading. Okay, we've switched over to the dough hook, and I've got the machine all loaded. And I'm going to add 2.5 teaspoons. I like to use InstaFirm yeast. This bag I've almost gone through, but since I started doing sourdough, I am not using as much yeast. All right, so we'll start this. And let that come together, let it go in there. Now I like to let this knead for about 25 minutes, but because I'm using my KitchenAid for this, you can do this by hand, but it takes a while, but you like this to build up because this is going to create that dough. It's going to create a softer dough with some of the heat going on inside. Plus, it's going to create a that window pane test. But so I like to do this, and I'll kick up the heat or the speed a little bit. But I like to do it in 8 to 10 minute intervals, and then let the machine cool for 3 to 4, and then start it up again. So it takes a little bit, and I like to keep the heat in. So I cover it with a towel and we'll let it do its thing. All right, so we finished our kneading, and it's a very soft dough. And so we're gonna let that, I'm gonna cover it, and we're gonna let this thing do its thing and rise till it's about double in size. And then we're gonna do the punch down and then shape it into rolls into the hamburger bun shape I want. And then we'll get back to it. So we're gonna let this rise. I'm gonna clean this up a little bit. Now, when I was kneading it, one thing you'll find when doing it in here, every once in a while, it would all fall down. So I had to go in with a spatula and scrape the sides and kind of get it to do its thing because it wants to spread out. And you have to get it into a bowl. And it does that especially towards the end when it gets a little hotter. So I'm just making sure everything is together in here. All right, we'll cover it and we'll let that proof. It'll probably take about an hour or so. It takes as long as it takes. Okay, let this rise. I realized after I had set it aside to rise earlier that I had forgotten to add the teaspoon of salt. And when it calls for salt, add salt. Salt is good and it makes it taste better and it works well. And it also will help control the yeast a little bit so it doesn't go and eat the dough too fast. So this is risen well. So I ended up, after I kneaded it, I transferred it to a clean bowl with oil in it. But you know, it punches down a little bit, so we got plenty of air bubbles in there. So we're just going to transfer this out, and I'm going to cut this and half it, then I'm going to quarter it. Then I'm going to shape these into balls again. So all we're really doing is punching this down a little bit, and then we're going to shape it. And I think these will work with, try to get it into a shape where I can do it, because I want to third this. Now you can pull out a scale at this point and try to get them as even as possible. Now, I think halving was better. Because that feels like about the right size. And so what I'm going to do is, because I want these to be hamburger buns, so I'm going to quarter these again. So I'm going to end up with 8 pieces out of this dough. But I'm going to do it out into a flat disc. And then I'm going to put them onto my sheets. And I've got my sheets lined with silicone, because that's what I like to use. And because I'm not weighing these, they'll probably have a few that are smaller and a few that are larger. That just means you make a bigger hamburger. Yeah, I thought I would end up with enough for 2 trays. It looks like I'll fit them all on one. If you roll them first, you kind of create a little bit of tension in the surface and kind of make a smoother top. But I think by the time this rises, it'll be pretty smooth and look pretty good. And we're going to do an egg wash on these before we bake them. All right, now I'm going to cover these with plastic wrap and then cover it with a dish towel over that. Try to keep some of the warmth in, and we'll let these rise until they've about doubled in size, so about 45 minutes to an hour. So we're all set. These have just about doubled, or actually they're pretty close to doubled in size. So they're pretty ready. A little lumpy, but that's fine. So we're going to create a little egg wash, which I have an egg here, just a little dollop of milk. And then we hit it with a fork. Just kind of whisking that together. Break up, mix that egg yolk in good and get that milk. All right. And then just brush the top of these. Get it down the sides if you want. Now this is strictly for looks. They'll cook up the same either way, but it gives it a nice shine, makes them look a little better. All right, I've already got the oven prepped at 350 degrees, and I'm going to cook them. Should take probably about 10, usually 12 to 15 minutes. So I'll check them. You can check them with a thermometer. I'm going to leave one of them unwashed just so you can see the difference. Okay, took about 16 minutes. I just pulled them out of the oven. And you can see these are nice and shiny. I cooked them until they were 190 degrees internal temperature. I just like checking with the temperature probe because that way you don't make any mistakes. And you can see how nice and shiny these are. And that one in the corner was the one we left. So it's not a huge difference, but I don't know, it makes them a little more appealing. But those should be good now for some nice hamburgers. So we'll slice one open after they cool. I'm gonna take them off the pan and put them on a rack and let them cool, and then we'll check them out. All right, here we are. Got our buns. I like them this way. I like them a little flatter. That's why I spread them out more, because you could actually bunch them up a little bit and make them taller. But they've got a nice crumb. The crumb is tight on these, but it's very, very, very soft. And they taste great. So I'm gonna save this one because it's great if you slice these up, put them in your toaster on bagel setting, and just toast the inside of them before you bake, before you use them for whatever sandwich filling or whatever you want to put in there, and just enjoy. But yeah, I like this ratio because they're thinner, they're big enough for the hamburger, and you don't end up with like this huge ratio of a huge bun, and it's narrower. I like this for a sandwich, for a burger delivery device. All right, well, that doesn't suck, so enjoy.